In the dim glow of candlelight, colonial taverns of the 1700s were far more than places to grab a drink. They were the living pulse of early America. Inside these smoky rooms, the air was thick not only with the scent of roasted meats and simmering soups, but with the sound of laughter, clinking tankards, and conversations that would influence the future of a nation. Travelers from distant colonies would warm themselves by the fire and feast on dishes like hearty turtle soup, while merchants met over mugs of cider to negotiate trade, barter supplies, and build the commercial foundations of a growing society. But beneath the simple hum of daily life, something far more significant was brewing. Between bites of roasted venison and freshly baked bread, rebels and thinkers leaned close, whispering about liberty, taxation, and revolution. These meals were not just food, they were fuel for the political and cultural awakening of a people who were beginning to imagine a world beyond British rule. Colonial tavern food tells a story of resourcefulness, of limited ingredients turned into memorable meals, and of a country finding its identity one plate at a time. Some dishes were rugged and practical, meant to satisfy travelers who spent days riding through wilderness roads. Others were surprisingly refined, borrowing techniques from European kitchens while adapting to the ingredients of the New World. Today, we're stepping back into those taverns dish by dish to uncover 25 surprising foods that filled colonial plates, ignited debate, comforted strangers, and in their own quiet way, helped shape the birth of America. Some of these dishes may shock you, and a few just might inspire you to try them yourself. If there was one dish that kept colonial taverns alive, it was mutton stew with ale. Picture a heavy iron pot hanging above a crackling fire, slowly simmering with chunks of sheep meat, onions, root vegetables, and a hearty pour of ale. In the 1700s, ale wasn't just a drink, it was a necessity. Water wasn't always clean, but ale was safer, richer, and brought warmth to tired travelers coming in from long days on horseback or laboring in the fields. Every spoonful carried depth and comfort, the kind that revived spirits and loosened conversations around wooden tavern tables. A bowl of stew served with simple bread could keep a grown man full for hours. Today, you could make it at home for less than $3, but back then, it was far more than food. It was fuel for long journeys, long nights, and even longer debates about freedom and the future of America. If mutton stew was the food of everyday life, roast suckling pig was the true showstopper of colonial taverns. Picture a whole piglet turning slowly over the fire, its skin bronzed to a perfect golden crisp, releasing an aroma so rich that every head in the tavern lifted to look. This wasn't a meal for an ordinary night, it marked something worth celebrating. A birthday, a harvest festival, a political victory, or simply someone with the means and the desire to make a statement. Nothing went to waste. The main cuts were served fresh at the table, while leftovers became pies, soups, or the next day's dish. And just like today, when a whole roasted pig appears at a gathering, it speaks without a single word. This is not just food. This is a moment. In colonial America, a roast suckling pig didn't just fill stomachs, it filled rooms with excitement, pride, and memory. Unusual by today's standards, but pure genius in its time. Beef and oyster pie was a colonial favorite that blended land and sea in a single unforgettable bite. Picture tender stewed beef mixed with plump oysters, once cheap and abundant, then sealed beneath a golden, buttery crust and baked until the filling bubbled with rich flavor. The combination might seem strange now, but to 18th century diners, it was bold, hearty, and deeply satisfying. Travelers, merchants, and even politicians gathered in taverns over plates of this very pie, discussing everything from British taxes to shipping routes to the latest colonial gossip. It was the kind of dish that filled the stomach, restored energy, and earned loyal fans with every serving. Affordable, comforting, and layered with flavor, beef and oyster pie proved that limited ingredients could produce something extraordinary. In an era of rough roads and uncertain futures, a warm slice of this pie was a moment of pure comfort. Not every colonial tavern meal was rough or rustic. Sometimes the table looked surprisingly refined, like the elegant veal cutlets with mushroom sauce. Imagine thin slices of tender veal, lightly seasoned and fried to a perfect golden crisp, then covered in a luxurious sauce made from wild mushrooms gathered from nearby woods, simmered with butter, herbs, and a depth of flavor that felt almost aristocratic. In an age when many meals were simple out of necessity, this dish transported diners back to European kitchens and dining rooms, reminding travelers of sophistication, culture, and the old world they had left behind. Served in a smoky American tavern filled with rowdy voices, the contrast was striking, a refined dish in a rugged setting. For merchants, officers, and elite travelers, this was more than dinner, it was a taste of home, a brief return to elegance while forging a new life in a young and unpredictable America. From elegance to practicality, colonial taverns relied on simple yet vital dishes like pickled cabbage relish. Tangy, crunchy, and sharply flavorful, it was the perfect counterpoint to heavy stews, roasted meats, or a few too many tankards of ale. But pickling wasn't just about taste, it was survival. In an era without refrigeration, a barrel of cabbage brined in vinegar, salt, and spices could last through harsh winters, travel long distances, and stretch a harvest to feed many mouths. Taverns served it not only as a cheap side dish, but as a tool to balance the richness of their main courses, keeping meals lively and palates refreshed. Affordable, practical, and surprisingly vital, pickled cabbage relish reminded colonists that even small, humble foods had an important role at the table. It was a dish that preserved both flavor and life, a simple but clever solution that kept tavern menus fresh and reliable year-round. Few dishes captured the true taste of colonial America like chicken braised in apple cider. Imagine a whole bird, simmered slowly with sweet onions, fragrant herbs, and fresh-pressed cider, filling the tavern with an aroma that was both comforting and unforgettable. The cider wasn't just a drink, it was a staple, grown in abundance, and trusted when water was often unsafe. By braising the chicken in cider, tavern cooks transformed a simple farmyard bird into a rich, savory meal that felt special, warming both body and spirit. Served at long tables where travelers, merchants, and locals gathered, it was more than sustenance, it was an invitation to share, to laugh, and to linger over conversation and debate. Affordable, hearty, and deeply satisfying, apple cider braised chicken showcased the ingenuity of colonial kitchens, taking everyday ingredients and turning them into meals that nourished, comforted, and created community, one pot at a time. On the harsher days of colonial life, taverns relied on hearty, practical dishes like salted beef and turnip pottage. Salt preserved the beef for months, ensuring tavern kitchens could feed travelers and locals even when fresh meat was scarce. But preserved meat came with a cost. It was tough, salty, and required hours of slow boiling to become tender enough to eat. Turnips, humble and hearty, were added to stretch the dish further, giving it substance and nourishment that sustained body and spirit. This wasn't a glamorous meal, it lacked the refinement of roasted capons or veal cutlets, but it was reliable, filling, and essential. A steaming bowl of pottage kept farmers, soldiers, and weary riders on their feet, providing the sustenance needed to endure long journeys and cold winter nights. In every way, salted beef and turnip pottage embodied the practicality, resilience, and resourcefulness of colonial tavern fare. Time for a touch of sweetness, colonial-style Indian pudding, a simple yet comforting invention. Made from cornmeal, milk, and molasses, this dessert was slow-baked into a thick, warm custard that filled taverns with a rich, homey aroma. Cornmeal was abundant and affordable, milk was easy to source, and molasses imported from the Caribbean added a deep, sweet flavor without breaking the budget. In smoky tavern rooms, where farmers, travelers, and politicians debated taxes and the future of the colonies, Indian pudding offered a quiet moment of comfort. It was hearty, filling, and surprisingly indulgent for such humble ingredients. Served warm, sometimes with a drizzle of cream if the tavern could spare it, this dessert reminded colonists that even in uncertain times, there was sweetness to be found. Affordable, practical, and deeply satisfying, Indian pudding turned everyday ingredients into a taste of warmth, community, and resilience in colonial America. Nothing captured the taste of colonial coastal comfort quite like clam chowder with milk. Along the New England shores, clams were abundant and inexpensive, making them a perfect ingredient for tavern kitchens. Combined with potatoes, onions, and a splash of milk, they transformed humble, everyday ingredients into a hearty, filling stew that satisfied hungry travelers after long days on the road. The milk added richness, the clams contributed a briny depth, and the root vegetables stretched the dish to feed a crowd. Served hot alongside crusty bread or biscuits, clam chowder was more than just sustenance, it was a reminder of home for weary riders, merchants, and sailors passing through. Economical, simple, and deeply comforting, this dish reflected the resourcefulness of colonial cooks, who turned what was plentiful into a meal that could warm the body and spirit alike. In taverns, clam chowder became a beloved staple, offering warmth, familiarity, and a taste of the sea. Next on the colonial tavern menu, molasses pudding, a simple yet indulgent dessert, made from flour or cornmeal, eggs if the cook could spare them, and a generous pour of dark, rich molasses. This pudding was inexpensive to make yet delightfully sweet. Molasses, imported from the Caribbean, provided a deep, robust flavor that ordinary sugar couldn't match, making the dessert both practical and satisfying. Baked slowly, the pudding became thick, sticky, and comforting, filling tavern rooms with its warm, sweet aroma. It was hearty enough to last for days, serving as dessert one day and breakfast the next, keeping patrons happy and well-fed. In smoky taverns filled with laughter, conversation, and the clinking of mugs, molasses pudding offered a touch of luxury from humble ingredients. Affordable, practical, and deeply satisfying, it reminded colonists that even in challenging times, there was still room for sweetness and comfort in their daily lives. For a touch of elegance in colonial taverns, nothing compared to roast capon. A capon, a castrated rooster, offered tender, juicy meat richer than ordinary chicken, yet milder than wild fowl. Roasted slowly over an open hearth with fresh herbs from the tavern garden, like sage, thyme, and parsley, the bird filled the room with an irresistible fragrance that drew every eye to the table. Simple preparation, yet luxurious in flavor, made it the perfect centerpiece for special occasions or wealthier patrons. There were no complicated sauces or heavy breading, just honest roasting that highlighted the quality of the meat and the abundance of the New World. Serving a roast capon signaled celebration, marking birthdays, harvests, or a particularly grand evening. In smoky rooms filled with lively conversation, the sight and scent of the golden bird reminded guests that taverns weren't just about filling bellies, they were about creating memorable moments, blending practicality with subtle luxury. Not every dish in colonial taverns was about luxury. Sometimes practicality ruled the table. Onion and potato pie was the perfect example of humble ingenuity. Layers of thinly sliced potatoes and sweet onions were baked under a simple crust, occasionally enriched with a splash of cream or broth if the tavern had it on hand. Affordable and filling, this pie stretched simple ingredients into a hearty meal that could sustain weary travelers, farmers, or merchants without emptying their pockets. Potatoes, still becoming common in colonial America, provided substance, while onions added sweetness and flavor as they caramelized in the oven. Served hot alongside a slice of bread and a mug of ale, the pie offered comfort and nourishment in equal measure. It wasn't flashy, nor did it signal wealth, but its reliability made it a favorite among tavern patrons. In a world where survival and practicality were paramount, onion and potato pie proved that simple, well-prepared food could be deeply satisfying. Colonial taverns weren't just about sustenance, they had room for a little joy, too. Apple fritters with cinnamon were a sweet escape from the smoky, raucous rooms. Each fritter was golden and crisp on the outside, giving way to a tender, fruity center that melted in your mouth. Rolled in a mixture of sugar and cinnamon, They released a warm, fragrant aroma that could lift even the weariest traveler's spirits. Cheap to make yet endlessly satisfying, these treats were perfect for sharing or sneaking a bite in secret. Patrons could pause from heated debates over politics, trade, or local gossip to enjoy a small taste of comfort. In an era when desserts were simple, hot apple fritters represented a moment of indulgence, a little sweetness in a hard, noisy world. For a few moments, the world outside the tavern melted away, leaving only sugar, spice, and happiness. Colonial taverns often offered more than savory meals. They had treats that carried warmth and comfort, like gingerbread loaf. Dense, dark, and fragrant, this bread was made with rich molasses, zesty ginger, and a pinch of cloves, creating a flavor that was both sweet and slightly spicy. It wasn't just delicious, it was practical too. Long-lasting and hearty, a slice of gingerbread could travel in a pocket, sustaining a traveler on a long journey or serving as a comforting snack between meals. In the smoky, bustling taverns, the aroma of freshly baked gingerbread brought a touch of home to weary patrons, reminding them of hearth fires and quiet kitchens. Affordable and satisfying, it was a treat that appealed to all, from merchants counting coins to politicians deep in discussion. Every bite offered a moment of indulgence, a sweet escape in the midst of a busy, demanding colonial day. In the lively atmosphere of colonial taverns, ale-soaked sausages were a dish that demanded attention. Bold, rich, and unforgettable, these sausages were simmered slowly in strong, hearty ale, which cut through their fattiness and added a depth of flavor that paired perfectly with a mug of the same brew. The aroma alone could draw patrons from across the room, promising a meal that was both satisfying and spirited. More than just food, ale-soaked sausages fueled conversations, late-night debates, and the occasional rowdy disagreement. They were the kind of dish that kept beer flowing for hours, binding tavern-goers in camaraderie, laughter, and sometimes mischief. Cheap to prepare yet rich in character, this simple yet hearty meal perfectly captured the essence of colonial tavern culture, a place where food, drink, and human energy met in a lively, unforgettable mix. Each bite was a reminder that even in the 1700s, food could inspire connection and excitement. In colonial taverns, boiled ham with mustard sauce was the definition of reliability and comfort. A whole cured ham would be simmered slowly until tender, its rich flavors intensified by the careful cooking, then sliced thick and served alongside a sharp, tangy mustard sauce. Salted and preserved, the ham could last for weeks, making it an essential dish for feeding travelers even in the harsh winter months when fresh meat was scarce. Patrons would gather around tables, savoring the savory, slightly smoky taste of the ham while spreading mustard generously over each slice, adding a punch that perfectly balanced the richness of the meat. More than just sustenance, this dish symbolized practicality and resourcefulness, a dependable choice that kept bellies full and spirits high. In every tender bite, colonists experienced nourishment, warmth, and a small taste of home, even in the busiest, smokiest taverns of the 1700s. In the midst of hearty meats, rich stews, and smoky tavern air, buttered peas with fresh mint offered a welcome touch of brightness and green. Simple yet elegant, this dish combined tender peas lightly tossed in melted butter with a sprinkle of fragrant mint, creating a balance of flavor that lifted the heaviness of the main courses. It wasn't just a side, it was a reminder that freshness and seasonality mattered, even during hard times. Taverns served it to bring color, flavor, and a sense of lightness to the table, giving diners a moment of relief from dense, salty, or slow-cooked dishes. Each bite was crisp, slightly sweet and aromatic, a subtle celebration of nature's bounty. In a world of preserved foods and long winter months, these small green peas, dressed simply, symbolized care, thoughtfulness, and a connection to the garden, proof that even colonial tavern fare could surprise with its simplicity and charm. Colonial taverns were far more than mere places to eat and drink, they were the beating heart of early American life. In the smoky rooms lit by flickering candles, strangers found themselves sharing tables, exchanging stories, and forging alliances that would sometimes last a lifetime. Farmers, sailors, merchants, and travelers all gathered under one roof, discussing everything from the latest harvest to news from across the Atlantic. Political debates mingled with laughter, while the clinking of tankards marked the rhythm of daily life. Each meal served was more than sustenance, it was a catalyst for connection, conversation, and even rebellion. Recipes passed from hand to hand, flavors from land and sea met on the plate, and in the act of sharing food, communities formed. These taverns offered not just nourishment, but also a space where ideas, opinions, and dreams mingled as freely as the ale. In a sense, every dish from humble stews to elaborate roasts played a role in shaping the spirit of a nation in its infancy. As we look back at the vibrant, varied, and sometimes surprising foods that filled colonial plates, it's clear that these meals carried more than calories, they carried culture, tradition, and a sense of belonging. So, which dish would you try first? Would it be the hearty mutton stew, the sweet Indian pudding, or perhaps the elegant veal cutlets? Share your choice in the comments below. And if this journey into the kitchens and taverns of early America has sparked your curiosity or made your mouth water, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that bring history to life one plate at a time.